Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Startup Jungle. I'm your host, Lo Silva, and here with me today I have Nir Eyal. He is an author, speaker, coach, consultant, expert to all things habit, kind of getting known in these startup circles as the habit expert. So, Nir, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Nice to have you. Nice to have you. So, I kind of wanted to dig in a little bit first and kind of get started with tell me a little bit about how you ended up becoming so strong and so proficient in habits and the mind of the brain and kind of like how those things work.
Well, I don't want to go too far in how much of an impact I'm having. I'm hoping to help entrepreneurs build better products and try to save them a lot of the heartache that I felt running my last company, where we were building all sorts of products, and many times I couldn't really tell which one of them would succeed and which ones wouldn't. I always had good intentions and I always wanted my products to succeed, and we always worked really hard. And sometimes things worked and sometimes they wouldn't, and many times we couldn't see a rhyme or reason. And so what I started doing over the past several years is to start to collect patterns around these products that compel people to form new habits. And so that's been the core of my study over the past several years now, since my last company sold, was really looking at what are the fundamental building blocks of these products that can form habits.
And if I have them right, they are triggers, actions, rewards, and engagement, right?
Almost. The last part is investment. So
Oh,
the,
okay. All
that's
right.
the four steps of the hook model: is a trigger, an action, a reward, and an investment. And we find that in all sorts of products that create user habits, and of course I'm referring to some of the usual suspects that I'm sure many of you use every day: Facebooks and Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest and Snapchat, these products that are used multiple times a day kind of without conscious thought. We see these patterns emerge time and time again of these four steps of the hook model.
So, in the hooked being the name of your book, which I want to get into a little bit after we talk about this. But with that, I guess startups are really starting to really put a lot of focus into these things, and that all kind of starts with onboarding, right?
That's right. So onboarding is a big part of getting people into the hook model in the first place. But it's kind of its own thing. I like to tell entrepreneurs that I meet with and consult with that there's kind of these three fundamental pillars of every startup, and it really breaks down to growth, engagement, and monetization. The thing is that each of these is necessary but not sufficient.
Hmm.
So I've seen many companies, and I'm sure you have as well, that have amazing growth, right? They have an unbelievable growth trajectory, and then something goes wrong, right? The engagement isn't good enough. So even though they have amazing growth, and maybe they even have a way to monetize someday, without engagement, they've got nothing. And then I've seen other companies that have incredible engagement and super habit-forming products, and that's really what I specialize in, is how do you build engaging products. But without growth and without a monetization strategy, you've still got nothing. And so these three pillars are required: of engagement, monetization, and growth. You have to have all three to really have a successful company. And so what I focus on is primarily on that engagement pillar.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny you say that because a lot of startups do have this hockey stick growth, and they're going great and they're getting users and they're just focused on that kind of acquisition. Then they have no monetization strategy, and they don't have one coming up either. There's just that's not even really like something they're considering. They're just focused on growth. But there's nothing else. I mean, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Then they fall and
That's
they
okay.
fail.
With some businesses, that's certainly okay because there's an idea of what that monetization strategy might be. So, a lot of times in the popular media, people, when the WhatsApp deal was announced, people said, "Oh, they haven't made any money, and why? How can this company be worth this much money?" Well, they have a pretty good idea of how they're going to make that money, right? Facebook knows how to monetize social networks pretty darn well, and so it's not that I'm saying you have to actually monetize. But you have to have a plan to how might your business model monetize someday. And then, in some businesses, that's what comes first. It's about an innovative way to monetize because growth and engagement are known variables. But in other businesses, that's not the case. How do you grow becomes the most important question, or how do you keep people engaged becomes the most important question. So it's very contextually specific on your specific company.
So this might be a tricky question, but with startups that we're seeing, what is in your experience something that startups are kind of overlooking, that they're not paying attention to in these pillars and in the habit forming thoughts? What is
Yeah.
that no one really considers that is very important?
Yeah, I think Paul Graham wrote this article about how growth is everything, and I disagree. I think that engagement turns out to be actually more important than growth. Growth is super important. As I said, it's one of
Yeah.
the three necessary pillars. Even if you have amazing engagement, but you don't have growth, you've got diddly. But I think startups are too infatuated with growth. Everybody wants to be viral. Everybody wants their apps to grow as quickly as possible. But I think engagement turns out to be more important, because if you have a company that's growing slowly but has very high engagement, you have to have some kind of growth, right? But you can actually get big slowly.
Hmm.
So if you look at a company like Evernote, Evernote is not viral, right? There's nothing viral about Evernote. It's an organic growth strategy, but the product turns out to be incredibly habit forming. Once you invest in a product like Evernote, you're going to be using it for a very, very long time. And so they can grow slow and steady, and eventually get lots of users. But if you turn that around and say, okay, well, what if we have amazing growth but no engagement, or very low engagement, and we can't create habits? Then what happens? Well, then you've truly got nothing, right? Even if we've seen this happen many times where companies have this hockey stick growth, and then everybody's leaking out the bottom of the bucket. And that's not sustainable. Of course, the best, right? The model that everybody wants is high growth and high engagement. So to answer your question, I think the area that most entrepreneurs are not thinking about enough is, how can you engineer engagement? How can you engineer habits? And it turns out that there is a repeatable pattern.
What is the pattern? And I'm sure you guys probably discussed that a little bit in depth in the summit that you just had.
Yeah, so the pattern is the hook model. It's these four steps of a trigger, action, reward, and investment. And there's a lot more to that. And as you mentioned, I wrote this book about this 2.5 years that I took to study this pattern. But if you look at time and time again, these products that we find most engaging, they always follow this distinct pattern of these four steps.
That's very insightful. So I want to talk about habits kind of as an entrepreneur as well.
Mhm.
How do you build habits to be a little bit more productive and to focus a little bit more on works? Because as a startup, being in startups and having to do 25, 30 different things, a lot of people are multitasking, they're doing this or they're doing that. How can we create and form better habits for ourselves to increase our productivity?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's a little bit outside my area of expertise in that I'm not a person who focuses on personal habits as much as I focus on habits. I will tell you from personal experience, though, some of my own learnings and habits. But again, I'm not really a personal development guru. That's not my area of expertise. But some things that I do to shape my own work habits. One thing I do is called swallow the frog, and that's a mantra that comes out of I think it was a Mark Twain story around you do the most difficult stuff first. So I always do the most difficult thing in the first thing in the day. So I don't check email first. I don't do any of this stuff that's kind of easy to do. I write. So that's always the first thing I do, is the hardest thing first thing in the day, because that's when you have the most willpower at your disposal. That's when you're most cognitively fresh. So that works out really well for me. I also have kind of very strict work habits. So, I go to the gym at the same time every day. I take my daughter to school at the same time every day. I write for a certain amount of time every day. And so I try and take out as much of the decision making as I can to kind of routinize my day-to-day behaviors. So that it leaves me available to do the heavy thinking and the heavy lifting on the stuff that really matters. So that's another thing I do. Um, I think in terms of specifically to the entrepreneur's context, the first thing you have to do is to make sure you're prioritizing the right things, and that's not easy. In fact, my advice to the CEOs that I meet with and consult for is that, look, a CEO has but one job, and that is to prioritize. That's it. That's
Yeah.
actually your entire job, because you can get people to help you do the work, but in terms of prioritization, that's only the CEO that can make that kind of judgment. But that is much easier said than done. But that is the fundamental skill, I think, around being a productive individual, is how do you prioritize? And when it comes to mistakes that I see made, it's always a problem of prioritization. People doing the thing that's fun or the thing that's interesting versus the thing that needs to be done. So that's my biggest piece of advice, is prioritize the right stuff.
Very insightful, and very very true as well. So we've talked a little bit about onboarding, and we've talked a little about uh, getting hooked, essentially. I want to talk and get your ideas on what do you think gamification has to do with creating habits, with all these apps and these things like that. How important do you think, and if at all, gamification matters nowadays with keeping this engagement?
Yeah. So gamification is a tool. There's many, many tools out there, but gamification, just to get everyone on the same page, is using game-like elements in non-gaming environments. So things like, the typical three suspects are points, leaderboards, and badges. That's what everybody thinks about when they think about gamification. That's not the entire toolkit, but that's kind of the most often cited um, aspects of gamification. Now, those things work really well in the right place and time. And so when I see gamification done incorrectly is when it doesn't consider the full hook model. So gamification can work in that if the rewards are fulfilling to the users, if they scratch the user's itch, then they can work really, really well. But where I see it not working well is when they're plopped in without actually considering, does it really address the user's need, right? If the user's need is to be entertained, well, gamification can help them entertain them. It can help entertain them. But if there's another need, right? If it's about efficiency, sometimes it might get in the way. So gamification works when it's tailored to the user's need and addresses that internal trigger, which is a big part of what I talk about in the book, is really understanding your user's itch if you have any hope of actually scratching it.
Yeah, in this world of, 25, 30 devices at the same time, your iPhone, your iPad, your computer, TV's on, whatever it may be, it's extremely hard to manage these things. Do you have any input on what startups and what companies can do to kind of, create some engagement and create that hooked feeling with all this other noise going on?
Yeah. Well, I think that finding ways to focus and think deeply is going to be uh, the character trait that really differentiates people over the next few decades. It used to be about information. It used to be about what you know. Well, information today is a commodity. We're swimming in information. Everything is accessible. You can be as smart as a Harvard grad of a few decades ago, back when being a Harvard grad meant that you knew everything that was important to know in the world, so to speak. But today, all that information is online, right? You can learn everything you could possibly want to know is available for you. What the internet can't deliver for you, and for the first time is becoming a really scarce commodity, is the ability to focus. Is the ability to concentrate and to think deeply, because our products are so habit forming, because they grab our attention, because frankly they're so good. They do a lot of great things for us. However, we have to figure out how these products shape our behavior so that in some cases we can unwind these things. So my writing really is in two realms, and they kind of seem a little schizophrenic if you think about it, but if you read my blog, half my writing is about how to build habit-forming technologies, how to help people build healthy habits, and the other half is how to prevent unwanted manipulation. And so my advice around, if you really want to be great at something, it's really about this continual practice at it, and to do that, you have to clear the clutter. And many times that clutter is all these thoughts and distractions and devices and apps and websites that can pull us away from what's really important. And so I think developing that skill and, frankly, using the technologies that help you develop that skill is critically important. So one last thing I'll say is that I'm very hopeful that there's this new generation of products that can help us regain our focus and help products not be so habit forming in a way. So one product that I use, and in fact I can't write without it, is called Freedom. And Freedom is this little, very simple app that it's a pre-commitment device essentially. So you tell Freedom how long you want to block the internet, and it will essentially turn off the web for that set period of time. So every day when I write, I type in 90 minutes, I hit OK, and I can't get on the web whether I like it or not unless I reboot my machine, which is a lot of work. And so that helps me regain focus to have some time where I'm just thinking about one subject without being distracted by the web. And so that I couldn't have written the book I wrote without that program.
That is I had no idea that tool existed, and
It's a
that
life
that is a game changer because it's extremely difficult. Like I'll be sitting there responding to emails, or I might have to be writing something as well, and things like that, and then your Facebook comes up, or someone's hitting you on Skype, and I try to shut everything off. There's apps where you can change your Facebook to not see any news feeds and stuff like that, but then your phone goes off, and I've taken my phone. If I have to do something, I'm very much like you, to where in the morning I've broken down my habits to where I understand that in the morning I'm the most productive, I'm the most ready to do stuff. So I crush the morning. I go to the gym very early. I'm done at about 11, and then I kind of take like a mental break for an hour or so, and then I kind of get back on it. But I didn't know this tool existed, because that increases productivity in amazingly without all those things coming at you.
Yeah.
It's crazy what the world has kind of gotten to.
That's right. But I think that's going to be the easier part. I think when it comes to these two things of building these habit-forming technologies or living with them and dealing with them, actually, for most people, we'll figure it out, right? As Paul Graham says, we develop these antibodies. And I think we will, right? We'll find these apps, we find these behaviors that help us increase productivity, and it becomes kind of a skill set that we learn to help us focus and live the kind of life we want to live. What's much harder to do is to build these technologies if your business model requires your product to be habit forming. That's actually not so easy. That's something that is quite difficult for companies to do. And so that's why I wrote this book. That's why I focus with first, how do you build healthy habits? Because I think that we're on the precipice of an age where we can use our technologies for good, where we can help people live happier, healthier, more productive, more connected lives by using these technologies. And so that's really why I wrote the book, was to help people build those technologies to form healthy habits.
Perfect. So we're actually coming up here almost to the end. I kind of wanted to touch just a little bit more. I had one question on the book, but I kind of want to touch on the event that you do. I know that you just had one, and you're having one in Europe as well. It's the Habit Summit, right?
That's right. So we just had one at Stanford on March 25th, so that's just passed. It was a great event, 400 people, and we're actually doing a similar event, totally different roster of speakers, on April 30th, so later this month in Amsterdam. And so you can find out more at HabitSummitEurope, all one word, .com, Habit Summit Europe.
We'll make sure we put those in the show notes. And finally, I just want to make sure that everyone picks up your book, and I'm sure they will. We'll have links for everything on the show notes as well. But what do you think one of the most important, one of the kind of golden nuggets that someone could pick up from reading the book Hooked?
Sure. So the book is really about how to build habit-forming products. The name of the book is Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. So obviously that's what it's all about. And it's really the book that I wish I had as an entrepreneur a few years ago when I was running my last company. But I think if you really want a competitive advantage as an entrepreneur, I think you need to decide to go into the right field. And so that's the most important decision you can make when it comes to how you allocate your human capital. You're not like a VC. Us entrepreneurs, we can't put a little bit of ourselves in a bunch of different companies. We can only do one company at a time. And so we really have to be thoughtful about where we allocate our human capital. And so part of the advice that I give in the book, and I have a whole chapter of this called the morality of manipulation, because I go into why it's so important for us to really consider how we change people's behavior, because let's face it, this is manipulation. And so we have a very special responsibility as designers, because we have more power to affect people's day-to-day lives than we ever have before because of the ubiquitous nature of our technology. So my advice, if you want the highest chance of success, is to be what I call a facilitator. So I do this little 2x2 where you think about one axis being whether you use the technology or whether you do not use the technology, and on the other axis is whether you believe it materially improves people's lives or whether you believe it does not materially improve people's lives. And if you're in that upper right quadrant of someone who's making something that you believe materially improves people's lives, and you yourself are the user, not only is that a great moral place to be, right? That's a very, you're making something that you believe improves people's lives that you yourself use. That turns out to be your highest chance of success. So when you're a facilitator, that's where we see these companies come from, right? Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest. Time and time again, that's the archetype for the type of person who succeeds.
Yeah, it's not about the money. It's about the true belief that it's going to impact.
Yeah, and that you yourself use. One
Yeah.
thing that you get from designing for you is that you have access to your users, right? The hardest thing to know what to build for is someone that you don't understand. So when
Yeah.
these companies build for themselves, they have a huge advantage because the user is right there. And so that tends to be just a much higher rate of success we find in those companies that fit that mold.
Yeah, it's a much natural thinking process as well, rather than having to do all this research and gather data points and figure out someone who is just not you. At the end of the day, it's tough speaking for someone else and
Very
thinking.
hard.
In,
Very
in
hard.
so, yeah,
And your motivation tends to die out, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's the most important piece is that eventually you say, who needs this? And
Well,
then
there's
when
no
you
true passion there.
that's right. That's right. Whereas if it's something that you want for yourself, and frankly, that's my model. This question that I've been answering now for close to 3 years around how does technology change our habits, I just love this topic. I get up every morning and I want to know more.
Yeah.
And so that's really what drives me. I'm answering my own questions here. I'm doing research for myself. Then I'm very thankful that other people find it helpful as well.
Well, awesome. That's an amazing place to end the show. So, Nir, I want to thank you for your time and tell everybody to check out the blog Nir and Far, which is awesome blog
Thank
name,
you.
by the way. It's just very clever. But yeah, and check out the book Hooked. We will have all the show notes. So, Nir, again, thank you so much. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.